At 1:47. In the morning, a man in a gray cleaning uniform sat down in front of a $1 million machine and fixed what 30 engineers couldn't in 3 weeks. He didn't have permission. He didn't have a badge. He had a mop bucket parked outside the door and a daughter at home who still believed her daddy could fix anything. His name was Caleb Anderson. And the moment the warning lights went dark and the system hummed back to life, he stood up, picked up his mop and walked away like nothing happened. But the camera saw everything. Drop a comment right now. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. And if stories like this hit different for you, subscribe. Because this one, it's just getting started. The night Caleb Anderson's life changed forever started the same way every other night had for the past 14 months, with the smell of industrial cleaner and the sound of his own footsteps echoing off marble floors that cost more per square foot than his monthly rent. He pushed his cart through the lobby of Westbridge Technologies at exactly 10:17 p.m., the same time he always arrived, the same route he always walked. Left wing first. Server corridor second. Executive floor last. The security guard at the front desk didn't look up. He never did. Caleb had stopped expecting it around month 3. He swiped his key card, not the blue one that engineers carried, not the gold one for management, the white one. The cleaning staff card. The one that opened supply closets and service elevators and bathrooms and almost nothing else. He rode up in the service elevator, the one with the scratched walls and the flickering overhead light that facilities had been promising to fix since before he started. The main elevators, the glass ones you could see from the lobby, the ones with the mirrored interiors and the soft jazz that played on the way up, those weren't for him. He'd learned that on his first night. Not because anyone told him directly, because when he'd stepped toward one, instinctively, a woman in a blazer had looked at him the way people look at someone who has walked through the wrong door, and he had understood without a single word being spoken. I took the service elevator now without thinking about it. That was the thing about being invisible long enough. You stopped fighting it. You started moving around the shape of it the way water moves around a stone. Not because the stone is right, but because the water has somewhere it needs to go. Caleb's daughter Maya was 7 years old and already the most serious person he had ever known in his life. She had her mother's eyes. Dark, deep, the kind that looked at you like they were reading something written underneath your face. She had her mother's stubbornness too, which meant that when she decided something was true, the entire weight of the universe wasn't going to change her mind. What she had decided firmly, and without any room for debate, was that her father was a genius. She had decided this at age 4 when he fixed her music box with a toothpick and a piece of tape. She had reconfirmed it at age 5 when he rigged a fan and an old water bottle into a cooling system for her bedroom during the hottest week of summer. She had announced it officially to her entire kindergarten class at age 6, apparently in great detail, because her teacher, Miss Patterson, had pulled Caleb aside at pickup one afternoon with a look of genuine awe. She told the whole class, "You invented electricity." I tried to clarify. She told them Thomas Edison worked for you. Caleb had covered his mouth to keep from laughing because Maya was standing right there watching him with complete seriousness, daring him to contradict her in front of a witness. He had not contradicted her. He didn't have the heart. The night cleaning job at Westbridge paid $19 an hour. With overtime some weeks he cleared $800, most weeks closer to $650. It was enough to keep the lights on in the 2-bedroom apartment on Desmond Street, enough to keep the refrigerator stocked enough to cover Maya's after-school program at the community center, where Miss Renee watched her until 10 p.m., when Caleb's sister Denise would pick her up and stay the night. It was not enough for a lot of other things. It was not enough for the tutoring. Maya's teacher recommended when she started struggling with reading in 2nd grade. It was not enough for the field trip to Washington, D.C. that Caleb had to sign a hardship waiver for. It was not enough for the winter coat he'd been looking at online for 3 weeks, the one with the good lining, the one that would actually keep her warm, because the one she had was 2 sizes old and had a zipper that stuck. He kept the window on his phone browser. He told himself next paycheck, then the one after. The coat stayed in the window. He told himself she didn't know. He was wrong about that, But she never said a word because Maya Anderson was 7 years old and already protecting her father's feelings with the quiet expertise of someone 3 times her age. 14 months ago, Caleb Anderson had been a systems integration engineer, not a junior one, not entry level. He had spent 11 years building and maintaining complex industrial control systems for Hargrove Industrial Technologies, a mid-size firm that supplied automated manufacturing systems to clients across 6 states. He was good at it. Not textbook good. Not certification good. Something harder to quantify and harder to teach. He understood systems the way some people understand music. Intuitively. He could walk into a room with a malfunctioning control network and hear something wrong before any diagnostic tool told him where to look. His manager, Carl Pittman, used to joke that Caleb didn't troubleshoot problems, he had conversations with machines. He had been making $73,000 a year. He had been on a track for senior engineer. He had been, by most measurable standards, building a life. Then his wife died. Diane Anderson died on a Tuesday morning in February, 18 months before Caleb started pushing a cleaning cart through the halls of Westbridge Technologies. She had a brain aneurysm. She was at work. She was 32 years old. She was 3 months away from finishing her nursing degree. There was no warning. There was no time. There was a phone call at 11:14 a.m. that Caleb had never fully recovered from. Not the words of it, not the silence after it, not the way his body had simply stopped functioning for approximately 45 seconds. While his brain tried and failed to process information, it was not built to receive. He had driven to the hospital. He had sat in a waiting room. He had been told. And then he had driven back home because Maya was in school, and someone needed to pick her up at 3 p.m., and he was the only one left. That was the thing nobody told you about grief when you were the only parent. You did not get to stop. Not fully. You got moments, you got the drive home, you got the shower with the water running loud enough to cover the sound. You got 2 a.m. after she was finally asleep, and the apartment was quiet enough to let it hit you. But you did not get to fall apart. Not the whole way. Because there was a 7, then 6, then 5-year-old who needed breakfast and clean clothes, and someone to read to her at night, and someone to check under the bed, and someone to be there when she woke up afraid. So Caleb stayed there. He stayed together enough. He made it 8 months before Hargrove let him go. I didn't see it coming, which he understood later was naive of him. But grief had a way of narrowing your field of vision down to the immediate. The next meal, the next school morning, the next hour, and he had missed the signs. The missed deadline on the Carver account. Not because he didn't know the work, but because he'd been in the school counselor's office the afternoon it was due, because Maya had stopped eating lunch and started having nightmares, and the counselor thought Caleb should know immediately. The argument with Simmons from procurement, which Caleb still maintained he had been correct about, but which apparently registered as insubordination in a way that went into a file he didn't know existed. The performance review, where Carl, who had been his biggest advocate for 6 years, had looked at him across a desk with something between guilt and apology, and said the words, "We need to talk about recent performance." He was let go with 3 weeks of severance and a letter of reference that described him as dedicated and technically proficient, words so careful and so lukewarm that Caleb had read it twice, looking for the part where Carl actually said something true. He had put the letters in a folder. He had not taken it out since. The job search lasted 9 months and left marks on him that he would carry for a long time. He applied to 47 positions. He was qualified for most of them, overqualified for some. He heard back from 11. He had interviews with 7. I was offered one, a contract position, 2 states away, that required 30% travel and offered no benefits. He had stared at that offer for 2 days before calling his sister Denise and asking her honestly if she could watch Maya 3 to 5 nights a week on no reliable schedule. Denise had said yes immediately, the way Denise always said yes, because she was the best person Caleb knew, and because she loved Maya like her own. But Caleb had heard something underneath the yes of a woman with her own job, her own 2 kids, her own life, and he had said no to the contract position and hung up the phone and sat in his kitchen for a long time. I didn't blame the companies that didn't call back. He had read enough to understand what a resume gap looked like from the other side of a desk. He had read enough to understand other things too. Things he had less interest in dwelling on, but couldn't entirely dismiss things that other black engineers in online forums discussed with the particular exhaustion of people who had been having the same conversation for decades. He applied to 6 more positions after turning down the contract role. He heard back from none. He needed something. His savings were at $1,100. Maya's after-school program cost $60 a week. The rent was due. He took the cleaning job. The strange thing, and he wouldn't admit this to anyone, not Denise, not the guys from his old job. He still texted, sometimes. Not anyone was that there was a part of the cleaning job he didn't hate. The building itself was full of things worth understanding. Westbridge Technologies was not a small operation. They had 3 dedicated server rooms, a climate-controlled testing facility on the 4th floor, a systems lab that Caleb could see through the glass wall when he cleaned the corridor, and more industrial-grade hardware per square foot than anywhere he'd worked before. And at 10 p.m. when the engineers went home, Caleb could look at it. Not touch, not interface, not engage, but look. And in looking, he started understanding things. The hum of the cooling system on the 4th floor that ran slightly loud on Tuesday nights, probably a bearing starting to go on one of the secondary fans, maybe 18 months from failure. The loading pattern on the service elevator that suggested they were routing too much weight through the east shaft and not enough through the west. Small things. Invisible things. The language of a building that nobody was listening to. I didn't say anything to anyone. He was the cleaner. Cleaners didn't have opinions about HVAC systems. He had been at Westbridge for 4 months when he first heard the engineers talking about NovaGrid. He wasn't supposed to hear it. They were in the break room, and he was in the hallway outside cleaning the coffee station near the vending machines, and the door was partially open. It worked clean in simulation every single time. Simulation is not deployment. You know that. I know that. Chen knows that. What Chen does not know is why it's failing. Because we haven't found it yet. We've been looking for 3 weeks, Marcus. 3 weeks. Adriana's breathing down everyone's neck. The Holcroft demo is in 22 days. I'm aware. 22 days, Marcus. I said I'm aware. Caleb kept wiping the counter. He didn't look up. He had learned the particular skill of cleaning in a way that made him acoustically invisible. Slow, methodical nothing. Sudden nothing that reminded anyone he was there. He heard a lot of things that way. He had heard the product development team argue about release schedules. He had heard a woman from HR cry in the bathroom on the 3rd floor 3 Wednesdays in a row. He had heard an executive on his phone in the parking garage saying things that would have made the ethics committee very interested. He never said a word about any of it. But the NovaGrid conversation stuck with him, because he had heard that particular frustration before, in his own voice, years ago, working on an industrial control system for a plastics manufacturer in Ohio, and he had heard the shape of the problem underneath the frustration even from the hallway. He pushed his cart forward. He kept moving. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was the lead systems engineer on the NovaGrid project, and over the following 2 weeks, Caleb learned everything about him without ever having a conversation with him. He knew Marcus took his coffee with no sugar and too much creamer, because the cup was always pale and always left on the corner of the workstation nearest the window. He knew Marcus was the last one out most nights, sometimes as late as midnight, sometimes later. He knew Marcus was under an almost inhuman amount of pressure, because Caleb had found twice now the same stress ball in the hallway near the testing room door, apparently thrown and not retrieved. He knew Marcus was frustrated in the specific way that competent people get frustrated when they cannot solve a problem that should be solvable. Not panicked, not defeated, but grinding. Locked. Turning the same key in the same lock over and over. Caleb knew that feeling well. He hadn't allowed himself to think about why he recognized it so precisely. It was easier not to. 3 days before everything changed. Caleb overheard something that he could not walk away from as cleanly as the rest. How was mopping the corridor outside the 4th floor testing room at 11:30 p.m. The lights inside were still on. Marcus was in there with a younger engineer. Caleb had heard the others call her Priya, and they were running a system test, and Caleb had positioned himself near the water fountain, because the floor there always needed extra attention, and because the acoustics near the fountain carried sound in a way that was no fault of his own. There it is again. 12-second delay. 11.8. Same as yesterday. Same as Thursday. What's triggering it? That's what I don't know. Logs show normal load. Network traffic is clean. Hardware checks out. Could be a clock sync issue. I checked sync. It's not sync. Could be. Priya, I've checked everything. A pause. I know. 20 days. I know, Marcus. Another pause. Longer. Okay, let's run it again. Caleb stood at the water fountain. I was not supposed to be standing at the water fountain. He was supposed to be moving. Moving was the whole job. A stationary cleaner was a cleaner someone noticed, and a noticed cleaner was a problem. But he stood there for just a moment longer. 11.8 seconds. Same time. Every test. Not random. Periodic. He looked down at the mop in his hands. He picked up his cart. He moved on. He told himself he wasn't going to do anything. He told himself this convincingly for approximately 18 hours. He told himself he was a cleaner. He told himself he didn't have access to the right systems. He told himself that even if he was right about what he thought he was hearing, bringing it up was not something he could do without making himself look like something between presumptuous and threatening, and he had been in enough situations to know exactly how a black man who stepped outside his designated role in a glass tower full of people who didn't know his name would be received. He told himself all of this. And then Maya called him at 9 p.m. before his shift. She called him from Denise's phone because her own little tablet was charging, and the first thing she said was not hello. "Daddy, did you fix the thing yet?" He sat in his car in the West Bridge parking lot, still in his uniform shift, starting in 20 minutes. "What thing, baby?" "The big machine thing. The one you told me was making a wrong sound." He had not told her about the machine. He had definitely not told her about a wrong sound. What he had told her in passing, barely even a full sentence, was that the building he worked in had some interesting equipment. "Who told you about a machine?" "You talk in your sleep." He rubbed his face. "I don't." "You definitely do. You said timing offset and cascade failure, and then you said dang it, except you said the other word. Maya. So did you fix it?" "It's not my job to fix it." Silence. Not the silence of a child who accepts an answer. The silence of a child who is thinking about the answer and finding it insufficient. Whose job is it? The engineers here. Are they fixing it? A pause. They're working on it. But you know what's wrong. It wasn't a question. He looked at the building. The lights were on in the fourth-floor windows. He could see from where he was parked the faint blue glow of the testing room monitors. "Daddy." "Yeah. You always know how to fix things." He sat with that for a moment. "I'll call you in the morning, okay, before you go to school." "Okay." Another pause. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby. I'm not worried about you. I just want you to know that. I'm not worried." He didn't answer right away. "I love you, Maya." "Love you too. Don't say the other word again." She hung up. He sat in the car for another 5 minutes. Then he got out. He walked to the service entrance. He swiped his white keycard. And he went to work. What happened next took 93 minutes. I didn't charge at the problem. He didn't break any rules, didn't access any system he wasn't supposed to access, didn't touch any hardware that wasn't designated for maintenance review. He worked within the edges of what was available to him. The facility management terminal, near the fourth-floor mechanical room that he'd noticed months ago, was connected to the building's integrated systems network. The maintenance access logs that showed system load across all the connected hardware. The diagnostics he could pull up without administrator credentials because they were designed to be accessible to facilities staff for basic monitoring. I didn't need the main system. He needed to see the timing. He pulled up the load logs for the past 17 days and laid them side by side in the most basic way available to him. A simple grid timestamps and load metrics, nothing sophisticated. And there it was. Not in one system. In the relationship between two. The building's integrated power management system. A separate independent architecture that Westbridge had installed 2 years prior for energy optimization had a scheduling protocol that fired at irregular intervals to rebalance power distribution across the building's high-draw zones. It was completely invisible to the NovaGrid network because it operated on a separate layer. But NovaGrid's testing rig was in the 4th floor testing room, and the 4th floor testing room was in Zone 7 of the building's power management grid. And every time the power management system fired its rebalancing protocol, it introduced a fluctuation, tiny within acceptable range, not a failure by any standard into Zone 7. By itself, nothing. But NovaGrid had a handshake protocol between its primary and secondary monitoring systems, a validation check that ran every few seconds to confirm system integrity before allowing high-demand functions. And that handshake protocol was sensitive by design because sensitivity was a feature, not a bug, because you wanted an energy management system to be sensitive to fluctuations. The power fluctuation from the building's management system hit Zone 7 at irregular intervals. When it hit during a handshake cycle, the handshake flagged an anomaly. The anomaly triggered a safety shutdown. 11.8 seconds later. Every time. Not a NovaGrid failure. Not a hardware fault. Not a software bug. A conversation between two separate systems that nobody had thought to listen for because nobody had thought to put a building's energy management system and a product's testing environment in the same mental space. Caleb sat with it for a long moment. Then he checked his math. Then he checked it again. Then he did what he could do within his access. He flagged a temporary scheduling adjustment on the power management system's Zone 7 rebalancing protocol, rerouting the rebalancing cycle away from the testing room's power circuit during peak testing hours, using the facility's override function that was legitimately within his access level because it was a standard energy management adjustment, the kind facility staff made weekly. He filed it properly. He labeled it correctly. He documented what he'd done in the facility management log in plain language because that was the right thing to do. Then he stood up. He looked at the monitors through the testing room window. He waited. For 3 minutes, nothing. Then the warning lights, the ones that had been cycling for 3 weeks, steady, rhythmic, insistent, went dark. One by one. The system hum settled. The monitors shifted from amber to green. Caleb stood there in the empty hallway. He thought about a lot of things in those few seconds. He thought about Diane, who would have laughed and hugged him, and then immediately told everyone she knew. He thought about Maya asleep at Denise's apartment, with her too small coat hung on the back of the chair. He thought about 11 years of knowing how to listen to machines, and 9 months of resume rejections, and 14 months of service elevator rides. I thought about all of it for about 30 seconds. Then he picked up his mop. He cleaned the hallway. He went back to his cart. He pushed it down the corridor, same route, same pace, same quiet man in a gray uniform that nobody saw. Except for the camera in the upper corner of the 4th floor hallway. The one that had been recording the whole time. He drove home at 6:30 a.m. He stopped at a gas station and bought a coffee and a pack of peanut butter crackers that he ate in the parking lot, sitting on the hood of his car because it was cold, but the air felt good. He called Maya before she left for school. "Daddy, did you fix it? Get your coat on, you're going to be late." "Daddy." A long pause. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "But I think so." He could hear her smile through the phone. That was a Diane thing, you could hear it. I knew you would. You can't know things like that." "Yes, I can. Aunt Denise says I get it from Mama." He looked up at the sky. "Go to school." "Okay, Daddy." "Yeah. I'm proud of you." He sat on the hood of his car in the cold parking lot of a gas station outside Baltimore and didn't say anything for a moment. "Go to school, Maya." She went. He sat there a little while longer. Then he drove home. He did not expect to hear from anyone at Westbridge. He did not expect the call that came in at 10:47 a.m., 3 hours after he'd gotten home, from a number he didn't recognize. A woman's voice he had never heard asking him to please come in at 2 p.m. that afternoon. He thought maybe he'd made a mistake. He thought maybe he'd overstepped. He thought maybe he was going to be fired. He ironed his best shirt. He went in, and what happened after that is a different kind of story entirely. The receptionist on the executive floor was named Gloria, and she had worked at Westbridge Technologies for 11 years. And in those 11 years, she had seen a great many things walk off the elevator and ask to see Adriana Whitmore. She had seen venture capitalists in custom suits. She had seen senators' aides with leather portfolios. She had seen a man once who claimed to represent a foreign government, which turned out to be a misunderstanding, but a very dramatic one that Gloria still told at dinner parties. She had never seen anyone come off the elevator in pressed dark slacks and a button-down shirt that had been ironed so carefully you could still see the fold lines from where it had been stored, carrying nothing. No portfolio, no laptop bag, no briefcase, just his hands and whatever was behind his eyes, which Gloria clocked immediately as a combination of controlled fear and something older and quieter underneath it that she recognized without being able to name. She had looked at him the way she looked at everyone who came to the 14th floor. Name, Caleb Anderson. She checked her screen. ID. He handed her his driver's license. She looked at it, looked at him, looked back at it. You're on the list. Have a seat. Ms. Whitmore will be with you shortly. He sat down in one of the chairs along the wall, not the couch in the center of the waiting area, not the chairs nearest the window with the view, but the one closest to the door, the one that most people walked past, the one that put his back to a wall and gave him a clear line to the exit. Gloria noticed that. She noticed most things. She went back to her screen and pretended to work and watched him from her peripheral vision for the next 12 minutes. He did not look at his phone. He did not cross his legs and bounce his foot the way nervous people did. He did not pick up any of the magazines on the side table. He sat with his hands resting on his knees, and he looked at the middle distance, and he was so still that twice Gloria glanced up to confirm he was still breathing. Whatever he was doing in that chair, it wasn't waiting. It looked more like bracing. When Adriana's assistant Marco came out and said, Ms. Whitmore was ready, Caleb stood up in one motion. No gathering of things, no adjustment of anything, just stood up and followed Marco down the hallway. Gloria watched him go. She thought about what she'd heard that morning, the murmur that had moved through the executive floor, the way murmurs always did, fast, imprecise, and more accurate than anyone wanted to admit. She thought, I hope they're decent to him. Then she went back to work. Adriana Whitmore's office did not look the way people expected a CEO's office to look. There was no massive desk positioned to make visitors feel small. There was no wall of framed accolades arranged to remind you who you were talking to. There was a large work table covered in actual work printed specs, annotated reports, 3 different colored pens, and 2 chairs on either side of it that were exactly the same. Because Adriana had read once that asymmetric furniture arrangements in meeting spaces created unconscious power hierarchies, and she had found this interesting enough to act on. She was standing when Caleb walked in. That was the first thing he noticed. Not sitting behind the table in a position of authority. Standing near the window, not posturing, not performing, just standing the way people stand when they've been sitting for too long and their back hurts, which is to say, like a human being. She was shorter than he expected. He wasn't sure what he'd expected. She was probably 45 with natural hair cut close, and she was wearing the kind of simple dark blazer that people who had already proven themselves wore when they no longer needed to prove anything through clothes. She looked at him directly, not assessing, not calculating, just looking. Mr. Anderson, thank you for coming in on short notice. Of course. Please sit down. He sat. She sat across from him. No desk between them, just the table flat equal. I want to be straightforward with you about why you're here because I think you deserve that. Okay. At approximately 1:52 this morning, our NovaGrid testing system stabilized, completely. For the first time in 3 weeks, it ran a full high-demand cycle without a single failure. She paused. Our engineering team found the stabilization when they came in this morning. No one from that team had been in the building after 11 p.m. No one from IT, no one from facilities management, except for a routine adjustment logged in our facility management system at 1:49 a.m. Another pause. Logged under your employee ID. Caleb held her gaze. I reviewed the security footage from the 4th floor. Adriana continued. I watched you spend an hour and 33 minutes at the facilities terminal. I watched you run diagnostics. I watched you identify something and then make a single adjustment to the power management schedule. She stopped. And then I watched you pick up your mop. The room was quiet. I want to understand what you saw, Adriana said. Not what you did. I can see what you did in the logs. I want to understand how you saw it. Because my lead engineer has 17 years of experience, and he has not found what you found in 3 weeks. Caleb was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, organizing. Your building's integrated power management system runs a rebalancing protocol on Zone 7. The testing room is in Zone 7. I know that. The rebalancing creates a minor voltage fluctuation. Within normal parameters, nothing that would trip any alert. But NovaGrid's handshake protocol, the integrity validation between the primary and secondary monitoring systems, is sensitive to fluctuations by design. When the rebalancing fires during a handshake cycle, the validation flags an anomaly. The safety shutdown follows automatically. 11.8 seconds later on average, depending on where exactly in the handshake cycle the fluctuation hits. Adriana had not moved. The two systems aren't on the same network. They're not in the same architecture. Nobody was looking at the relationship between them because there was no obvious reason to. The engineering team was looking inside NovaGrid. The problem was between NovaGrid and the building. A long silence. How did you know to look there? Caleb took a breath. Because that's where I would have looked if this were my job. Something shifted in Adriana's face. Not surprise exactly. Something more like recognition. What was your job, she said, before this one? He told her. Not everything. Not Diane, not Maya, not the weight of it. Just the professional facts. 11 years at Hargrove. Systems integration. Industrial control networks. The kind of work that required understanding how separate systems communicated with each other, not just how they functioned in isolation. Adriana listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Why did you leave Hargrove? I was let go. Why? He looked at her. Performance issues. What kind? I missed a deadline. I had a conflict with a colleague that was documented as insubordination. Was it insubordination? He almost smiled. I thought I was right. Were you? Yes. Then it sounds like it was a difference of opinion that someone with more authority chose to characterize a certain way. He didn't answer that. Mr. Anderson, I'm not asking to pry. I'm asking because the difference between let go for insubordination and let go because someone didn't like being told they were wrong is a significant difference, and I want to understand which one I'm looking at. The second one. And the gap in your employment since then. Caleb took a moment. I have a daughter. She's 7. I'm the only parent she has. The positions I was finding that were in my field required travel I couldn't commit to. By the time I was in a position to take something local, the gap in my resume was already long enough that I wasn't getting callbacks. Adriana nodded slowly. She looked at the table for a moment, then back at him. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if you think the honest answer isn't what I want to hear, all right? Last night when you were at that terminal, were you trying to help the company, or were you trying to prove something to yourself? The question hit him somewhere he hadn't expected. He sat with it for a real moment. Not performing deliberation, actually thinking. Both, he said finally. I think it was both. Adriana nodded. That's the right answer, she said. Anyone who tells me it was purely selfless is lying to me. And anyone who tells me it was only ego isn't someone I want on my team. What happened in the next 40 minutes was one of the stranger experiences of Caleb Anderson's adult life. Adriana walked him through the NovaGrid project, not the public version, not the investor summary, but the actual architecture, the actual problems they'd encountered, the actual stakes of the Holcroft demonstration in 19 days. She talked to him like he was a colleague, not like he was a candidate being evaluated. Not like he was a curiosity being studied, like he was someone whose opinion on the technical specifics actually mattered, and she was interested in what it was. He asked 3 questions during that 40 minutes. The first was about the handshake protocol's sensitivity threshold and whether it was adjustable without compromising the integrity monitoring function. Adriana stopped mid-sentence and called Marcus Webb. Marcus was in the building. He was always in the building now. She put him on speaker. Marcus, the sensitivity threshold on the handshake protocol, is it hard-coded or configurable? A pause on the other end. Configurable. But we set it at maximum sensitivity because the energy management use case requires it. Yes. But if the environmental conditions during testing are artificially introducing sensitivity triggers that won't exist in a real deployment environment, is there an argument for running tests at a calibrated threshold rather than maximum? A longer pause. Who am I talking to? Adriana looked at Caleb. Someone who found your problem, she said. The silence on Marcus's end was a specific kind of silence, the silence of a person recalibrating. Say that again. I said someone found your problem. Caleb Anderson. He works here. She paused. Night shift. Another silence. He's on the cleaning staff. He also has 11 years of systems integration experience and spent 90 minutes last night doing what your team couldn't do in 3 weeks. I'd like you to come up to my office. A pause. I'll be up in 5 minutes. Adriana put the phone down. Caleb looked at her. I should tell you, he said, that this might go badly for me when Marcus gets here. Why do you say that? Because in my experience, there's a version of this where I've embarrassed someone by doing something they couldn't do, and that person's discomfort becomes my problem. Adriana looked at him for a moment. Is that what you expect from me? I don't know you. Fair. She leaned back slightly. Here's what I can tell you. What I value is the result. I don't care who finds the answer. I care that the answer gets found. If Marcus Webb walks in here and decides to be embarrassed, that's his private business, and he can work through it privately. In my office, the only question on the table is what happened and what it means for the project. Caleb didn't respond. You look skeptical. I've heard versions of that before, from people who meant it. And then something shifted, and the version that they actually lived turned out to be different from the version they described. Adriana held his gaze. I can't prove myself to you in the next 3 minutes before Marcus arrives. You'll have to watch and decide. I know. But I'll say this. I'm not interested in theater. I'm not interested in optics. I have 19 days to the most important demonstration my company has ever attempted. And I just found out that the man who solved my biggest problem has been cleaning my building for 14 months without anyone thinking to ask him a single question. She paused. The part that bothers me most isn't what this means for last night. It's what it means about the months before it. Marcus Webb was 39 and tall and had the particular posture of someone who had been the smartest person in most rooms for long enough that it had become load-bearing infrastructure for his sense of self. He walked into Adriana's office, saw Caleb, and stopped. Not a dramatic stop. The subtle stop of a person whose brain is catching up to their eyes. Marcus, Adriana said. Caleb Anderson. He's been on the cleaning staff here for about a year. He also has 11 years of systems integration work in industrial control environments. She gestured to a chair. Sit down. Caleb, walk Marcus through what you found. Caleb looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Caleb. There was a moment between them. Caleb recognized it had been in versions of it before the particular charged moment where a person is deciding which version of themselves they're going to be in the next 60 seconds. Then Marcus sat down. All right, Marcus said. Walk me through it. Caleb walked him through it. He did it carefully and precisely, the way he'd have wanted someone to do it for him. No editorializing, no performance, just the logic sequence. The Zone 7 power rebalancing protocol. The fluctuation. The handshake cycle timing. The 11.8-second delay. The relationship between two systems that existed on separate layers and had never been mapped against each other because no one thought to put them in the same frame. Marcus didn't interrupt. When Caleb finished, the room was quiet. Then Marcus said, "Show me the load logs." Adriana pulled them up on her screen and turned it toward Marcus. He leaned forward and studied them. His jaw was doing something complicated. His hands were flat on the table and very still. Caleb watched him. He knew what Marcus was looking at. Not just the data. Marcus was looking at what the data meant about the past 3 weeks. The late nights, the consultants, the escalating pressure, the professional weight of not solving a problem you were responsible for solving. Marcus looked at the screen for a long time. Then he sat back. "It's a ghost interference problem," Marcus said. "The two systems aren't aware of each other. Technically, neither one is malfunctioning." "Correct. We were looking for a fault. There isn't one." "Correct. There's just two systems talking across each other without knowing the other one is in the room." "Yeah." Marcus was quiet. He looked at the table. Then he looked at Caleb directly. "How long did it take you?" Caleb considered being diplomatic, then decided against it. "An hour and 20 minutes to identify it. About 12 minutes to figure out the adjustment. The rest of the time was documentation." Marcus absorbed that. "We had 4 engineers and 2 outside consultants." "I know. I heard you in the break room a couple of weeks ago. The door was open." Something moved across Marcus's face. Not anger. Not embarrassment exactly. Something more complicated, the particular mix of feelings that comes when you realize that the answer was close to you for a long time and you didn't see it. "The break room is down the hall from the water fountain." "Yeah." "You heard the timing issue I mentioned. 11.8 seconds. Yeah." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at Adriana. "He's right," Marcus said. "The adjustment he made to the Zone 7 schedule should hold for testing purposes. For deployment, we'd want to implement a proper isolation layer between the building management system and the testing environment. But that's a clean fix. 2 days of work, maybe 3. "Can you start today?" Adriana asked. "I can start in an hour." "Good." She paused. "I want Caleb involved." Marcus looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Marcus. Another one of those moments, shorter this time. "That works for me," Marcus said. They went to the 4th floor together. Not Adriana. She had 11 other things to return to, and she trusted Marcus to handle the technical conversation. And she also understood intuitively that some things resolve better without a CEO in the room. They walked to the elevator. The main elevator. Caleb reached for his keycard before Marcus hit the button, some reflex from 14 months of habit, and Marcus noticed. "You always take the service elevator." "White card access." Marcus looked at the keycard in Caleb's hand. Looked at the elevator panel. Pressed the button for floor 4 without saying anything else. They rode up in silence. The elevator had mirrored walls and soft music, and it went up smoothly. No flicker, no rattle, nothing like the service elevator with the stuck light. Caleb stood with his hands at his sides and watched the floors go by in the display above the door. "I owe you an apology," Marcus said. Caleb looked at him. "I've passed you in the hallway for a year. Never once." He stopped. "I never thought to." He stopped again. "That's not right either. It's not that I didn't think to. I looked at what you were doing, and I made a decision about who you were based on that. And that was wrong." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "You weren't the only one. That doesn't make it—" "I know. I'm not excusing it. I'm just telling you it wasn't personal. Most people didn't look at me." "I should have." "Yeah." The door opened. They walked out onto the 4th floor. "I want to ask you something," Marcus said, "and tell me if this is out of line." "Okay." "When you figured out what was wrong, you could have just fixed it and not said anything, kept it anonymous. No one would have known it was you. They'd have figured it out eventually from the logs." "Maybe, but you documented it under your own ID. You wrote it up clearly. You made sure there was a record that pointed directly to you." Caleb walked beside him. "I needed them to know it was me." "Why?" A pause. "Because I needed to know if anything would change when they did." Marcus didn't say anything to that. They kept walking. The engineering lab was everything Caleb had observed through glass walls for 14 months, and being inside it was a different experience than he'd expected. Not overwhelming. Familiar. The equipment spoke to him the way equipment always had. He could read the room which systems were running hot, which interfaces were underutilized, which cables were routed in ways that were technically fine but less elegant than they could be. He didn't say any of that. He waited. Marcus pulled up the full NovaGrid architecture on the main screen, the actual architecture, not a simplified diagram, and turned to Caleb. "I want you to look at this and tell me what you see." Caleb looked at it, not cursorily. He looked at it the way he always looked at systems, starting from the edges, working toward the center, looking for the places where different components handed off to each other. The seams, the joints, the places where two separate design decisions met and had to cooperate. 3 other engineers were in the room. Priya, who Caleb recognized from the late nights in the corridor. A younger man named Davis, who was new enough that he still had the slightly startled look of someone who hadn't yet learned to be tired. And an older man named Fitch, who Caleb had seen exactly once before leaving the building at 7 p.m., carrying what appeared to be a structural engineering textbook and a subway bag. They watched him look at the screen. He could feel them watching. He didn't rush. "The isolation layer between the building management system and the testing environment," he said finally. "Where do you want to put it?" "That's what we need to figure out," Marcus said. "You've got 3 options. You can put it at the power input to the testing room cleanest from a hardware perspective. But you're looking at physical modifications to the circuit panel, and that's going to require a licensed electrician and probably a 2-day shutdown of the testing environment while permits clear," Priya was writing. "Second option, you put it at the software layer. Write an interrupt handler that detects Zone 7 rebalancing events and buffers the NovaGrid handshake cycle during the fluctuation window. You can implement that without touching hardware, but it adds a software dependency that you're going to need to document and potentially disclose to clients depending on your certification requirements." Davis had stopped looking skeptical and started writing. Third option, you adjust the NovaGrid handshake protocol's sensitivity threshold to a level that's still within your integrity. Monitoring standards, but doesn't flag the Zone 7 fluctuation as an anomaly, because in real deployment environments, you won't have this specific interference condition, so you're essentially calibrating your testing environment to better reflect actual deployment conditions, which is arguably what you should have been doing anyway. The room was quiet. Fitch, who had not said anything since Caleb walked in, leaned back in his chair and made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Option 3, Fitch said. "That's option 3. That's it. It's the lowest infrastructure cost, and it's the most honest representation of real-world performance," Caleb said. "But you'd want to validate the new threshold against your worst-case deployment scenarios before you commit. If there's an environment where the interference conditions are worse than what Zone 7 is producing, you'd want to know that before the Holcroft demo." Marcus was looking at him the way someone looks at a thing they've been trying to see clearly for a long time. "We have 17 documented deployment environments in the Holcroft scope. Run the threshold against all 17. It'll take a day, maybe less, if you parallelize the simulations. If it holds for all 17, you've got your answer, and you've still got 18 days to the demo. If it doesn't hold, then you've got 17 days to implement option 2, which is still plenty of time." Priya looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Caleb. "You've been cleaning our building for 14 months, Davis said. It wasn't rude. It was the statement of a person genuinely struggling to reconcile 2 pieces of information. "Yes." "And you knew." Davis stopped. "I mean, did you know what we were working on?" "I knew you had a problem. I heard enough to understand the shape of it." "And you didn't say anything." Caleb looked at him steadily. "Would you have listened?" Davis opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the screen. "No," he said quietly. "Probably not. That's why I didn't say anything." The threshold testing took 14 hours. Caleb went home at noon to sleep. He'd been awake since Maya's call the night before, which now felt like it had happened in a different week, and when Adriana's assistant Marco called him at 6 that evening, He was in the kitchen making grilled cheese still in yesterday's clothes because he'd fallen asleep on top of the covers and woken up 40 minutes ago. Ms. Whitmore would like to know if you're available to come in tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., executive floor. What for? A slight pause. I think it would be better if she told you directly. But, and she didn't ask me to say this, I've worked for her for 6 years. I know what a 9 a.m. on the executive floor means. Caleb stood at the stove with the spatula in his hand. Okay, he said. I'll be there. He flipped the grilled cheese. Maya came into the kitchen and looked at him in the focused way she had. You look different. I look exactly the same. Your face looks different. Faces don't change in one day. Yours did. She pulled out a chair and sat down. What happened? Nothing happened. Dad, I fixed the thing. She nodded slowly, like she'd already known. What's happening tomorrow? I have a meeting. At the building. Yes. With who? The CEO. Maya was quiet for a moment. She watched him take the grilled cheese off the stove and cut it diagonally the way she liked. Is it good or bad? I don't know. But you think it's good. He set the plate in front of her. I think it might be something. She picked up half the sandwich. Then you should wear the blue shirt. What's wrong with the dark one? Nothing. The blue one is just better. She took a bite. Mama always said the blue one. He stood there for a moment. Eat your food. I am eating my food. Wear the blue shirt. He went to the refrigerator to get her a glass of juice. He thought, wear the blue shirt. He thought, okay, Diane. He wore the blue shirt. He arrived at 9 a.m. and rode the main elevator up, not because of any conscious decision, but because he simply walked toward it without thinking, and by the time he noticed the doors were already closing. The elevator had mirrors and soft music. He looked at himself. 11 years of knowing how to listen to machines. 9 months of silence. 14 months of gray uniforms and service entrances and coffee cups left on his cart. The elevator opened on 14. Gloria at the reception desk looked up. Mr. Anderson. She smiled, and it was a real one. He'd seen enough of the other kind. I'll let Ms. Whitmore know you're here. He sat in the chair closest to the door. He breathed. He thought about Maya in her classroom right now, probably reading or doing math or telling someone something with complete certainty, carrying her mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness and her father's ability to listen to the way things were broken and figure out how to make them right. He thought, whatever happens in there, you already did the thing. You heard it. You found it. You fixed it. That's yours. Nobody can walk past that. Marco appeared in the hallway. Ms. Whitmore is ready for you. Caleb stood up. He walked down the hallway. He opened the door. There were 2 people in Adriana's office. Adriana standing again, backsore habit, or her way of greeting people as equals. He still wasn't sure, and a man he didn't recognize. 60s, silver-haired, the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where decisions mattered. Caleb, Adriana said. Thank you for coming. This is Robert Holcroft. Caleb went very still. Holcroft. As in the Holcroft demonstration. As in the client. As in the hundreds of millions of dollars in future contracts. As in the reason Nova Grid needed to work. Robert Holcroft extended his hand. Mr. Anderson, I flew in this morning. Adriana told me what happened 2 nights ago. He paused. I wanted to meet you. Caleb shook his hand. Sit down, Adriana said. Both of you. They sat. Robert, Adriana said, why don't you tell Caleb what you told me this morning? Holcroft looked at Caleb with the direct, unhurried assessment of a man who had made a career of reading people quickly. My company has been evaluating energy management systems for 18 months, Holcroft said. We've looked at 11 vendors. We've run tests, simulations, site visits, reference checks. And the thing that keeps me up at night isn't whether the technology works in a controlled environment. He paused. It's whether the people behind it understand it well enough to fix it when something unexpected happens. Caleb waited. What you did 2 nights ago, not just finding the problem, but understanding the relationship between two systems that nobody thought to map against each other. That's the kind of thinking I'm trying to buy. Holcroft paused. I'm not buying a product. I'm buying confidence that when something goes wrong in a real environment with real stakes, someone on the other end of the phone actually understands what they built. The room was quiet. I want to know, Holcroft continued, if you're going to be involved in the deployment side of this project. Caleb looked at Adriana. She looked back at him. That depends, Caleb said carefully, on what my role here looks like going forward. Adriana almost smiled. That, she said, is what this meeting is for. He called Denise from the parking lot at 11:30 a.m. She picked up on the second ring. What happened? Why are you calling at 11:30? You sound weird. Are you okay? What happened? I'm okay. Caleb. Den, I need you to listen. She listened. He told her all of it the night at the terminal. The security footage, Adriana's office the day before Marcus and the engineering lab. 14 hours of threshold testing that held across all 17 deployment scenarios, and this morning with Robert Holcroft, and what had been offered to him across a table on the 14th floor of a glass building he'd been cleaning for over a year. When he finished, Denise was quiet. That was how he knew it was real. Denise was never quiet. Den, I'm here. Her voice was different. I'm right here. I don't know exactly how it's going to look yet. There are details to work out, but it's Den, it's real. It's actually... Stop talking, she said softly. Just stop for a second. He stopped. She was quiet. He heard her exhale. She would have screamed, Denise said. Diane would have absolutely lost her mind. You know that, right? She would have called everyone. He looked up at the sky. I know. She would have called Mama. She would have called your old team. She would have called people she didn't even like. He put his free hand over his mouth. She would have made you wear the blue shirt. He laughed. It came out rough and strange and a little broken, and he didn't try to clean it up. Maya told me, he said. Of course she did. A pause. She's going to lose her mind too, you know. I know. You want to be the one to tell her? Yeah. Pick her up today. Yeah, I'll pick her up. Caleb. Yeah. Don't you dare cry in that parking lot. He was already crying in the parking lot. I'm not. You are. I'm not. Okay. He could hear her smiling. Go get your daughter. He sat in the car for a few more minutes. Then he started the engine. Then he drove to school. Maya came out of the building at 3:15 with her backpack on sideways, the way she always wore it, which drove Caleb genuinely crazy, and she saw him standing next to the car, and she stopped walking. He was supposed to be asleep. He always slept until at least 4. She looked at him. He looked at her. You're here, she said. Yeah. You never pick me up on Tuesdays. I know. She walked toward him slowly, watching his face with those dark reading eyes. What happened? A lot. Good a lot or bad a lot? Very good a lot. She stopped in front of him. Tell me. Get in the car. I'll tell you on the way. Tell me now. He crouched down to her level. She looked at him. He looked at her. I thought about 11 years and 9 months and 14 months and a 2-year-old music box and a 7-year-old who had decided at age 4 that her father was a genius and had spent 3 years defending that position with the ferocity of someone who had no intention of being wrong. You remember the big machine thing? The one making the wrong sound. Yeah. Did you fix it? I fixed it. She nodded slowly. And they want me to come work with them, not cleaning, engineering, what I used to do. Maya looked at him for a long moment. In her face, he could see her doing what she always did not. Reacting immediately, processing. Making sure she understood what was true before she committed to a response. Then she put both her arms around his neck and held on. He put his arms around her. They stayed like that in the school parking lot while other kids streamed past and other parents did pickup and the ordinary world moved around them like water around a stone. "I told you," she said into his shoulder. "I know you did. I told you you were more than a cleaner." "Yeah, baby, you did." She held on a little longer. Then she pulled back and looked at his face with her mother's eyes. "Your face is different again." "I know. It looks better." "Yeah." He stood up and opened the car door for her. "Fix your backpack." "It's fine. It's sideways." "That's how I like it." She got in the car. He stood there for just one more second. The ordinary street, the ordinary afternoon, the completely extraordinary weight of what an ordinary Tuesday can carry if you let it. He got in the car. He drove. The offer was real. That was the thing Caleb kept coming back to over the following 3 days. Not the details of it, not the title, or the salary, or the specific scope of responsibilities, but simply the fact of its reality. That it existed. That someone had looked at what he'd done and decided it was worth something and had said so out loud in a room with a witness. He had spent 14 months becoming very good at not expecting that, unlearning that expectation. It turned out took longer than he'd thought. He went back to his cleaning shift the Wednesday night after the Tuesday meeting. He'd asked Adriana if he should whether there was something procedural that needed to happen before things changed, whether he should just wait at home, whether there was paperwork, a transition period, a process. Adriana had looked at him with the expression of someone who had considered this more carefully than he realized. "The formal offer letter will take HR 3 business days to prepare. Your last scheduled shift is this Wednesday. I'd like to introduce you to the full engineering team in a proper context on Thursday morning." She paused. "How you want to spend Wednesday night is entirely up to you." He'd thought about it on the drive home. He went in Wednesday night, not because he had to, not because he was afraid not to. He went because the work had been his for 14 months, and he wasn't going to leave it incomplete in the middle of a week. He went because the floors on the East Corridor hadn't been done since Monday, and they needed doing. He went because whatever happened next, the version of him that had showed up every night for 14 months and done the work with his full self, deserved a proper last night. He went in and he cleaned the building. He did the left wing first, the server corridor second, the executive floor last. Same route, same pace, same cart with the wheel that pulled slightly to the right. He mopped the 4th floor corridor outside the testing room. Through the glass wall he could see the Nova Grid system running. Green lights, stable outputs. The system hum that had been ragged and uncertain for 3 weeks now, carrying a clean, regular rhythm. He stood there for a moment. Then he kept moving. At 5:45 a.m., when he was finishing up the lobby, the security guard at the front desk, the same one who had never looked up in 14 months, looked up. "You're here late." "Last night," Caleb said. The guard looked at him. "You transferring somewhere?" "Something like that." The guard nodded slowly. "Figured something was going on. Heard your name upstairs." Caleb looked at him. "Gerald," the guard said, extending his hand across the desk. Caleb shook it. "Caleb." "I know." Gerald held his gaze for a moment. "Good luck with it." "Thanks, Gerald." He pushed his cart to the supply room. He cleaned it out. He logged the chemicals properly, filed the maintenance report, left everything the way whoever came after him would need it. He rode the service elevator down for the last time. He didn't feel sentimental about the service elevator. He felt something more specific and harder to name, a kind of acknowledgement, the way you acknowledge a hard thing that is over. He drove home. He slept. Thursday morning, he put on the blue shirt. Adriana had gathered the full engineering team in the 4th floor conference room at 9 a.m., and she hadn't told most of them why. Caleb knew this because when he walked in with her, he could read the room in about 4 seconds. Marcus knew Marcus was standing near the window with his coffee and the specific posture of someone who has been briefed and is waiting to see how the unbriefed respond. Priya knew she caught Caleb's eye when he walked in and gave a small nod that was restrained and professional and contained about 6 different emotions underneath it. Davis probably knew because Davis was young and enthusiastic, and clearly the kind of person who found out things by asking questions constantly. The other 8 people in the room did not know. Caleb could tell by the way they looked at him, not unfriendly, but searching the look of people trying to place a face. They were certain they'd seen somewhere but couldn't locate in the right context, because they had seen his face, just never in a conference room. Adriana waited until everyone was seated. "I want to introduce someone that most of you already know, even if you don't realize it yet," she said. Caleb Anderson has been part of the Westbridge building for the past 14 months. Some of you passed him in the hallway last night. Some of you left coffee cups on his cart. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. He's also the person who solved the NovaGrid timing problem Tuesday night. Marcus can confirm the technical specifics. What I want to confirm is this: starting Monday, Caleb joins the engineering team as a systems integration specialist. His focus will be NovaGrid deployment and the Holcroft implementation. The room was quiet, in the specific way. Rooms get quiet when people are processing something that doesn't fit the category they'd prepared for. A man named Patterson Sr., hardware engineer, 15 years at Westbridge. The kind of person whose opinion other people in the room calibrated against, looked at Caleb with an expression that was doing something complicated. "The night cleaner," Patterson said. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't warm. "The systems engineer who's been working night cleaning," Adriana said. "There's a difference." Patterson looked at Adriana, then at Caleb, then at the table. "Walk me through the problem," Patterson said. "How you found it." Caleb looked at Adriana. She gave him the floor. He talked for 11 minutes. He watched the room change while he talked. Not dramatically. Not the kind of change that looks like a movie moment, but the real kind of change, which is slower and more uneven and happens at different speeds for different people. Davis had his notebook open and was writing. Fitch, who Caleb had met in the lab, was nodding with his arms crossed in the way of someone hearing confirmed what they already suspected. Priya was watching the other engineers watch Caleb, which told Caleb that Priya was the one in the room who understood people as well as she understood systems. Patterson was not writing. Patterson was listening with his full attention, which Caleb understood was not something Patterson did automatically or casually. When Caleb finished, Patterson was quiet for a moment. "The ghost interference model," Patterson said. "Two systems on separate layers creating an interaction that neither one's diagnostic framework is designed to surface." "Right. I've seen that before. Different context building automation and HVAC controls on a hospital retrofit we did about 8 years ago. Took us 2 weeks." He paused. "You did it in 90 minutes. I had fewer assumptions going in." Patterson looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Your team had been inside the NovaGrid architecture for months. You knew it well. That kind of familiarity makes you better at most things, and it makes you worse at one specific thing, looking outside the system, you know. I didn't know your architecture. I didn't have assumptions about where the problem was supposed to be. So I looked at the relationship between systems instead of inside one system." Patterson absorbed that. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Caleb, and there was something different in it now, still measuring, still the eyes of someone who reserved judgment carefully, but something had shifted in the direction of respect. "Welcome to the team," Patterson said. It wasn't enthusiastic. It wasn't a speech. It was the handshake equivalent of words' direct brief, meaning exactly what it said, and nothing more, and nothing less. "Thank you," Caleb said. Adriana looked around the room. 18 days, she said. "Let's get to work." The next 18 days were the hardest work Caleb had done in years. Not hard. The way. Cleaning had been hard. That was physical endurance. The ache of being on your feet for 8 hours. The particular exhaustion of doing invisible work in the presence of people who didn't see you. This was a different kind of hard. The hard of re-entering a world he'd been locked out of having to prove himself not once but continuously, of knowing that every time he opened his mouth in a technical conversation, someone in the room was making a private assessment about whether what came out matched what they'd been told to expect. He understood this. He didn't resent it. You earned a room by showing up in it, and showing up once wasn't enough. He showed up every day. He arrived before Marcus. He stayed as long as Patterson. He read the NovaGrid architecture documentation, the first weekend all of it, the full technical spec 430 pages, and came in Monday morning with 11 questions that were so specific and so good that Marcus had spent 40 minutes answering them and at the end had said to no one in particular, but loud enough for the room, "We should have caught 3 of these ourselves." The questions mattered. The questions were how Caleb worked. He didn't perform confidence, he earned it, and he earned it by understanding things completely before he said he understood them. The questions also did something else. They changed the way the room related to him. Because the questions weren't the questions of someone trying to prove they were smart. They were the questions of someone trying to understand the system, and in a room full of engineers who genuinely cared about the system, that was a language everyone spoke. Not everyone warmed to him at the same rate. There was an engineer named Cole Young, maybe 28, the kind of technical confidence that comes from being right, often enough to have not yet been seriously wrong, who had a habit of explaining things to Caleb at a level of detail that wasn't warranted, not maliciously. The particular obliviousness of someone who had made assumptions they hadn't examined. Caleb let it go for a week. Then, during a deployment simulation run, Cole started explaining to Caleb why the handshake protocol operated at a specific sensitivity threshold, and Caleb waited until he finished and then said quietly, "That's the threshold I recommended changing, to the one we're currently running." Cole stopped. "You..." He looked at his screen, looked at the documentation, looked back at Caleb. "Right. I knew that. I know you knew that." A pause. "I'll stop explaining things you already understand. I'd appreciate it." That was the end of it. Cole, to his credit, adjusted completely and permanently, and 3 days later was asking Caleb questions about industrial deployment environments with the genuine curiosity of someone who had decided to learn from a person he'd initially miscategorized. Caleb respected the adjustment. It wasn't nothing choosing to recalibrate. The hardest day of those 18 was day 9. They were running a full-scale deployment simulation, all 17 Holcroft environments, concurrent maximum load. The kind of test that would either prove NovaGrid was ready or reveal a problem they didn't have time to fix. It ran for 4 hours. At the 3-hour mark, something flagged. Not a failure. Not a shutdown. A pattern in the load distribution across 3 of the 17 simulated environments. A slight periodic variance that didn't trigger any alert threshold, but that Caleb noticed because he was watching the aggregate output, the way he watched everything, not for what was wrong, but for what was different. He stopped. He looked at the numbers. He looked at them again. He pulled up the specs for those 3 environments specifically. Marcus was across the room, deep in a conversation with Priya about the monitoring dashboard. Caleb sat with the numbers for 8 minutes before he said anything. He needed to be sure. He'd been in rooms before where he'd said something and been wrong, and in those rooms it had cost him more than it would have cost someone else. Because when you are the person the room is already privately evaluating being wrong, carries a weight that compounds. He checked his math 3 times. Then he walked to Marcus. "I need you to look at something." Marcus looked up from the dashboard conversation. Something in Caleb's tone made him move immediately. They stood together at Caleb's screen. 3 environments, 7, 12, and 15, Caleb said. The load variance. It's small, but it's periodic. Every 90 seconds approximately. Marcus looked at the numbers. It's within tolerance. I know it's within tolerance. I'm asking about the pattern, not the magnitude. Marcus leaned closer. Priya came over. Then Patterson. The room gathered without anyone calling it to gather the organic pull of something important being looked at. 90 seconds, Patterson said. 87 to 93, Caleb said. Close enough to be a cycle, not random. What are environments 7, 12, and 15? Priya asked. Davis pulled up the environment specs. Industrial sites, Davis said. High-draw manufacturing environments. The other 14 are commercial or municipal. The room went quiet. Caleb felt it before anyone said it. The shape of the problem assembling itself the way problems did when you'd been listening long enough. Industrial sites run their own power management systems, Caleb said. Separate from building infrastructure. Facility-level power optimization on a cycle. He watched the understanding move through the room. It was the same problem. Not identical. The mechanism was different. The architecture was different. But the fundamental dynamic was the same. Two systems on separate layers, each doing its job correctly, creating an interaction that neither one's design anticipated. Ghost interference, Patterson said. Same family, different species. We caught it, Marcus said. We caught it with 9 days to go. We caught it, Caleb said, because we were looking for it, because the last time we didn't know to look. Marcus turned to the room. New simulation protocol. Every environment gets mapped for facility-level power management systems before we run deployment scenarios. We assume interference until we confirm otherwise. He paused. And we need a standard isolation procedure that works across all deployment environments, not just building-level systems. 2 days, Caleb said, to build the procedure, maybe 3 to validate it. You want to lead that? Caleb looked at him. He heard the weight of the question, not just the technical assignment, but the recognition inside it. Yeah, Caleb said. I'll lead that. He called Denise that night sitting in his car in the Westbridge parking lot, which had become his thinking spot. The same way it had been in the weeks before everything changed, only now it carried a different quality. Day 9, she said. How is it? Good. Hard. Found another problem today. Oh no. No good. We found it early. We have time. So you found a problem, and that's a good thing. In engineering, yes. Finding the problem is the job. As long as you find it before the demo and not during it. Denise was quiet for a moment. How are they treating you? He leaned back in his seat. Mostly well. Mostly. There's always a mostly. Is it bad? No. It's just being new anywhere is a process. Being new somewhere that you've also been invisible for a year is a specific kind of process. He paused. Most of them are good. Some of them are still figuring out how to update their picture of who I am. That takes time. I don't expect it to happen overnight. And you're okay with that. I'm not fragile about it. I know what I know. Denise laughed softly. That right there, she said. That's Diane. What? I know what I know. She used to say that, verbatim, when people underestimated her. A pause. You started saying it after you two got together. I always thought you picked it up from her. He sat with that. Maybe I did. Doesn't matter who it started with. It's yours now. He looked at the building. How's Maya? Excellent. Extremely opinionated about her Halloween costume. I'm not going to tell you what she wants to be because I want you to experience it fresh. Is it bad? It's very specific. Give me a hint. Absolutely not. She made me promise. Go home, Caleb. See your daughter. He smiled. Yeah, I'm going. The thing about re-entry, and there was no other word for it, it was re-entry, the way coming back into an atmosphere after being somewhere without oxygen, is re-entry, was that it happened in layers. The first layer was professional. Learning the system, learning the team, re-establishing the language of his own expertise in an environment that was new. This layer was hard, but it was also the familiar kind of hard, the kind his mind was built for. The second layer was harder to name. It happened in small moments throughout those 18 days. The moment he sat at a real desk with his name on a badge beside the door. The moment he had his own login credentials for the primary system and not just facility management access. The moment a client representative on a preliminary call addressed him by title. Mr. Anderson, your team's approach to the isolation protocol. And he had to take a half-second to remember that he was the person being addressed, because some part of him was still waiting for someone to look past him to the actual engineer. That half-second happened more than once. He noticed it without judgment. It was residue. 14 months of being walked past left something in the body that didn't immediately dissolve when circumstances changed. What helped was the work, not as a distraction, as a ground. When he was in the problem fully in it, the residue didn't matter. His mind had one relationship with systems that had never changed and could not be taken from him. That ability to listen, to follow the logic, to hear the thing that was wrong before any instrument named it. That was always his. That part never went invisible. Day 12. Patterson found him in the lab at 7 p.m. on a Friday. Everyone else had gone home. Caleb was running validation tests on the isolation procedure. His procedure comparing performance across all 17 simulated environments with the new protocol in place. Patterson looked at the screen. You find anything? Holds clean across 15 of 17. I'm working on 14 and 6. Patterson pulled a chair over and sat down. What's the issue with 14 and 6? 14 has an unusual power management cycle 42 seconds instead of the standard 60 or 90. The isolation procedure is and sat down. What's the issue with 14 and 6? 14 has an unusual power management cycle 42 seconds instead of the standard 60 or 90. The isolation procedure is calibrated for the standard range. Adaptation. The logic's adaptable, the calibration is fixed. I need to make the detection window dynamic instead of static. How long? Maybe tonight. Depends how deep the fix needs to go. Patterson looked at the screen for a moment. And environment 6. 6 is the weird one. Caleb pulled up the specs. Industrial facility. Heavy manufacturing. But there's something in the load signature that doesn't match any standard power management profile I've seen. It's like... He paused. It's like two separate management systems running on the same circuit. Patterson leaned forward. That's not supposed to be possible. I know. The specs on that environment say single system. The specs are wrong. A pause. You're sure? I'm not sure about anything. That's why I'm here at 7 p.m. on a Friday. Patterson looked at the data. He looked at it for a long time. Show me the load signature. Caleb pulled it up. Patterson studied it with the focus of someone who had been reading system outputs for 15 years and knew the difference between noise and signal. That's a legacy system, Patterson said quietly. Running underneath. Probably hasn't been updated in 15-20 years. The facility might not even know it's still active. That's what I think too. If we deploy NovaGrid into that environment without accounting for a legacy system on the same circuit, it fails, not in testing, in deployment. Patterson sat back. 6 weeks ago, we would have deployed into that environment, followed the spec, and been blindsided. Yeah, because we trusted the documentation. Because we didn't know to mistrust it. Caleb looked at the screen. The documentation is accurate as far as whoever wrote it knew. The legacy system wasn't in scope. It was just there doing its thing, waiting. Patterson looked at him. How did you catch it? It felt wrong. The signature felt wrong. I've seen enough facility power profiles that something off about the rhythm shows up before I can explain it analytically. 11 years. 11 years. Patterson was quiet. Write it up, he said. Full documentation. Not just the fix, the detection method. How you looked at it, what you were looking for, what felt wrong before you had data to support it. I want that in the team knowledge base. Okay. Because what you're doing right now, that's not just technical work. That's a framework for how to look at deployment environments before we trust documentation. He paused. That framework needs to survive beyond this project. Caleb looked at him. You're saying put the methodology in writing so the team can use it without me. I'm saying put the methodology in writing so the team can use it better with you. He sat with that distinction for a moment. I'll write it up. Good. Patterson stood. Go home at some point. I will. 9 p.m. at the latest. You're no good to me, exhausted 5 days out from the demo. Yes, sir. Patterson paused near the door. Don't call me sir. Okay. I've been telling Marcus that for 6 years. He still does it when he forgets himself. He turned and left. Caleb listened to his footsteps disappear down the corridor. Then he turned back to his screen. Then he fixed environment 14. Then he figured out environment 6. Then he went home at 8:47 p.m. 3 days before the Holcroft demonstration, Maya came to the building. Not a planned visit. Caleb had mentioned in passing that he wanted her to see where he worked someday, and Maya had taken someday as a negotiating position rather than a timeline, and had presented a case to Aunt Denise that Denise later described as genuinely impressive for its logical structure, and the outcome of the case was that on Saturday afternoon, Denise brought her by. Caleb had cleared it with Marco, who had cleared it with Adriana, who had said yes and then apparently done something with that information that Caleb didn't find out about until they arrived. They came in through the front entrance. Main entrance, glass doors, lobby with the marble floors. Caleb met them at the door. Maya walked in and looked at everything with the focused attention she brought to every new environment, the same attention she used to take things apart and understand how they worked. "This is big," she said. "It's a big building." "Do you have your own office?" "Not yet. I share the lab with the team." "When do you get your own office?" "Maya." "I'm asking." "I don't know. That's not the most important thing right now." She looked up at the ceiling, at the lobby, at the badge on his lanyard, the new one, the blue one, the one that opened things that mattered. She pointed at it. "What color is that?" "Blue." "The other one was white." "Yes. This one opens more doors. A lot more." She considered this with the gravity of someone for whom the information was genuinely significant. "I want to see the machine," she said. "The big one, the one you fixed. I'll show you the lab. The actual NovaGrid hardware is in the testing room, but I can show you the monitoring system." They went up in the main elevator, all three of them. Maya and Denise and Caleb and Maya stood in the elevator and looked at the mirrored walls and the floor numbers ascending and said nothing. When the door opened on 4, she walked out and looked both ways down the corridor. "Which way?" "Left." She went left. Caleb and Denise followed. They walked past the engineering lab, and through the window, Maya could see the team Marcus at his station, Davis at the simulation desk, Priya at the monitoring array. "Those are your people," Maya said. "My team, yeah." "Do they know you're good?" Caleb stopped walking. "What?" "Do they know you're good, like at the job?" Denise made a sound next to him that was unmistakably suppressed laughter. "I think they're starting to." "They should know for sure," Maya said, "so there's no confusion." He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, with her mother's eyes and her mother's complete absence of patience for ambiguity. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you the monitoring system." He badged into the lab. The team looked up. Marcus saw Maya. And something happened in his face. Not just warmth, something more like recognition. The particular look of a person encountering a human context for a colleague they'd previously only seen in the context of work. "Is this Maya?" Marcus said. Maya looked at him. "Yes. Your dad told us about you." "What did he say?" "That you're the reason he does everything." Maya turned to look at Caleb. He shrugged. She turned back to Marcus. "That's accurate," she said. Davis laughed. Genuine delighted, the laugh of someone who had not seen that coming. Priya crouched down to Maya's level. "Do you want to see what the system looks like when it's running right?" Maya looked at her. "Yes." Priya walked her to the main monitoring display and started explaining, not in the way you explain to a child, but in the way you explain to someone who is genuinely interested, which is a difference Maya apparently recognized and responded to by asking 4 consecutive questions that made Priya look up at Caleb with an expression of pure delight. Caleb stood back. Denise stood next to him and hooked her arm through his. "She's going to be an engineer," Denise said quietly. "She's 7. She's going to be an engineer." He watched his daughter at the monitoring display, asking Priya why the line on the graph did what it did, following the explanation and immediately following it with another question. Doing what she'd always done, not accepting the shape of the surface, always looking for what was underneath. Her mother's stubbornness, her father's ear for what was wrong. He stood there. He let himself feel it fully. The room he'd looked at through glass for 14 months. The screens he'd watched from the corridor at midnight. The people who now knew his name and the work he was capable of. His daughter standing at the center of it asking questions nobody had thought to answer yet. "Diane," Denise said softly next to him. Not a question. He nodded. "Yeah." They stood there together, watching Maya learn something new in the room that had once not known Caleb's name and now had his methodology written into its knowledge base. Then Maya turned around and pointed at the monitor. "Dad, come look at this. Priya says this line is the thing you fixed. Come look." He walked over. He stood next to his daughter. He looked at the line. Clean. Steady. Exactly where it was supposed to be. "Yeah," he said. "That's the one." Maya looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "Good job, Daddy." He put his hand on top of her head. "Thanks, baby." The morning of the Holcroft demonstration arrived the way important mornings always do, ordinary on the surface and electric. Underneath the kind of day that looks like any other day from the outside, but carries a completely different atmospheric pressure if you're one of the people inside it. Caleb was up at 5. Not because his alarm went off. Because he was already awake, had been awake since 4, lying in the dark, with the particular alertness of a mind that had finished sleeping and decided the remaining hour wasn't worth pretending about. He lay there for a while. I thought about the 17 deployment environments and the isolation protocol and the legacy system in Environment 6 that they'd caught and corrected 9 days ago. He thought about the threshold validation and the documentation and the 430 pages of architecture spec he'd read in a single weekend and the questions he'd asked on Monday morning that Marcus had spent 40 minutes answering. I thought about all of it the way you think about something you've prepared for, as well as it's possible to prepare not anxiously, but with the steady awareness of someone who has done the work and now has to stand in the room while the work is tested. He got up at 5:15. He made coffee. He stood in the kitchen in the quiet of the apartment and drank it slowly. Maya's backpack was by the door sideways, the way she always left it, with a permission slip for a school trip sticking out of the front pocket that he needed to sign and return by Friday. Her cereal bowl was still in the drying rack from last night. Her sneakers were lined up next to the door with the Velcro straps tucked in neatly. She had started doing that herself 2 months ago, refusing help doing it slowly and carefully until it was right. He stood in the kitchen and looked at all of it. The ordinary accumulating evidence of a life. He finished his coffee. He put on the blue shirt. He arrived at Westbridge at 7 a.m. The building had a different energy that morning. Not chaos. Adriana didn't run a chaotic operation, but a heightened alertness, people moving with slightly more purpose than usual, conversations in corridors that stopped and resumed, the particular focused hum of a team that has been building toward a single point and can now see it directly in front of them. Marcus was already in the lab. Of course, Marcus was already in the lab. Marcus had probably slept in the lab. Caleb wouldn't have been surprised to find a sleeping bag under the main workstation. "Morning," Caleb said. Marcus looked up. He had the focused, slightly hollow look of a man who had been running on technical adrenaline for 2 weeks and was now 24 hours from being able to exhale. "How are you feeling?" Marcus asked. "Good. Solid. You?" "I've been running the final simulation since 5 a.m. Everything holds." All 17. All 17, including 6. "Good. I ran it 3 times. "Marcus." 4 times. "Go get breakfast." "I'm not hungry." "Go get breakfast anyway. You're going to be in a room with Robert Holcroft and 6 of his senior executives for 4 hours starting at 10 a.m., and you need to have eaten something before that happens." Marcus looked at him. "You sound like my wife." "Your wife is right." A pause. "She usually is." He stood up. "You want anything?" "Coffee. Whatever they have downstairs." Marcus left. Caleb sat down at the main monitoring station and ran one final check, not because he doubted the system, but because the act of checking was part of how he showed up to important things. He had always been this way. Verify not because you distrust the work, but because the work deserves to be verified. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. He sat with that for a moment. Then Priya walked in. "How's it look?" "Clean. All green." Marcus already ran it 4 times. "I know. I told him to go eat. Nobody tells Marcus to go eat. She set her bag down. He listened to you. He went downstairs. Priya sat at her station and pulled up the monitoring dashboard. She was quiet for a moment. Can I say something? Yeah. 3 weeks ago, the night before you found the problem. I was sitting in this room at midnight, and I was genuinely scared. Not about my job, not about the demo. Scared that we were going to let people down. That we'd built something we couldn't actually deliver. She looked at the green board. And then I came in the next morning and the board was green. Caleb didn't say anything. I didn't know it was you yet. Adriana told us that afternoon, and my first thought... She stopped. My first thought was complicated. What was it? My first thought was, why didn't anyone ask him? Before it got to crisis point. Why didn't anyone? Why didn't I just ask? The answer to that is simple. I know what the answer is. That's why it's complicated. She looked at him. I passed you in that hallway 100 times. I knew your face. I didn't know your name. Most people didn't. That's not an excuse. No, he said. It's not. They sat with that for a moment. Not uncomfortable honest. I just wanted to say that out loud, Priya said. Before today. Because today's going to be a big day, and there's going to be a lot of energy around it, and I didn't want the thing I actually wanted to say to get lost in all of that. I hear you, Caleb said. Thank you. She nodded. She turned to her screen. He turned to his. The Holcroft team arrived at 9:45. Robert Holcroft had 6 people with him, his chief operations officer, 2 senior technical evaluators, a systems integration consultant, who Caleb understood was essentially Holcroft's version of a Marcus Webb, a financial officer, and a woman named Sandra Chu, who was introduced as Holcroft's VP of Infrastructure, and who had the specific quiet authority of someone who had been the most important person in the room many times and no longer needed to signal it. Caleb watched Sandra Chu, the way he watched systems, not for what was on the surface, but for what was underneath. She had the eyes of someone who had been lied to by technical demonstrations before and had developed a sensitivity for it. She would not be impressed by polish. She would be looking for seams. Adriana made the introductions in the main conference room. When she got to Caleb, she said, Caleb Anderson, Systems Integration Specialist. He joined our engineering team this month. He's been leading the isolation protocol development for the deployment environments. Sandra Chu looked at Caleb with those eyes. How long have you been in systems integration? 11 years, most of it in industrial control environments. And before Westbridge, Hargrove Industrial Technologies, 6 years before that at a smaller firm in Ohio. What brought you to Westbridge? There was a version of the answer that was professional and smooth and moved past the question quickly. Caleb didn't give that version. I hit a rough period, lost my wife. My professional situation got complicated. The night cleaning position here was what was available, and I took it. I was on the cleaning staff for 14 months before this. He held her gaze. I'm telling you this directly because someone in your position is going to find out anyway, and I'd rather you hear it from me. Sandra Chu looked at him for a long moment. The person who found the timing interference problem, she said. That was you. Yes, Adriana told Robert. Robert told me. She paused. Ghost interference between the building management system and the testing environment. Correct. And the legacy system issue in Environment 6 in our deployment scope. Also me. Another pause. I've been running technical evaluations for 18 years, Sandra Chu said. The number of times someone has volunteered unflattering information about themselves in the first 2 minutes of a meeting is... She looked at Adriana briefly. It's not a large number. I find it saves time, Caleb said. Something shifted in Sandra Chu's expression. Not quite a smile, something more restrained and more genuine than a smile. Let's get started, she said. The demonstration ran for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Caleb had been in presentations before, had run them, had supported them, had watched them go wrong in the specific ways that technical presentations go wrong, when the people running them know the system better than they know the room. This one was different. The difference was that the system actually worked. Not performed working, actually working. Every environment loaded clean. Every high-demand simulation ran without interruption. The isolation protocol that Caleb had built held across all 17 environments, including Environment 6, where the legacy system signature appeared on the monitoring dashboard in real time and the protocol handled it without a single flag. Sandra Chu's technical evaluators ran their own tests. Parallel tests that Holcroft's team had designed independently, scenarios designed to stress test the system in ways the vendor wouldn't have prepared for. NovaGrid handled all of them. At the 2-hour mark, one of the technical evaluators, a compact, precise man named Torres, who hadn't said more than 12 words in the first 2 hours, leaned over to Sandra Chu and said something quietly. Sandra Chu nodded without looking away from the monitoring display. Caleb was watching the displays from his station when Marcus leaned over. Torres just told her it's the cleanest deployment architecture he's evaluated in 4 years. You heard that. Patterson heard it. Patterson told Davis. Davis told me. Davis needs to learn to not relay information like a game of telephone during a client demonstration. I know, but Torres said it. Caleb looked at the board. 17 environments, all green. Let's not celebrate until they leave the building, Caleb said. Obviously, Marcus said. And then, but Torres said it. Robert Holcroft asked to speak with Caleb privately at the 3-hour mark. Adriana flagged Caleb with a look from across the room, and he walked to the side conference room where Holcroft was waiting. Just the two of them, no assistants, no COO. Holcroft was standing at the window. He turned when Caleb came in. Sit down, Holcroft said. They both sat. I want to ask you something technical, Holcroft said. Not about the demo, about deployment. Okay, when we roll out into our actual facilities, not simulations, real environments, what's the failure mode I should be most worried about? Caleb looked at him. It was a good question. Not a test question, a real one. The question of a man who understood that demonstrations were controlled and reality was not. Documentation gaps, Caleb said. Every facility you own has systems that are accurately documented as of the time the documentation was written. The problem is that facilities evolve. Equipment gets added. Systems get upgraded. Legacy components get left running because nobody got around to decommissioning them. Your documentation tells us what was true. It doesn't tell us what's true now. Holcroft leaned back. Environment 6, he said. Environment 6, the legacy power management system that wasn't in your specs. That's not a vendor failure, and it's not a documentation failure. Someone documented what they knew. It's the gap between what was known and what exists. How do we close the gap? Pre-deployment site surveys. Physical walkthroughs of every facility before installation, specifically looking for power management systems, active legacy or standby, that aren't in the documentation. It adds time to the deployment schedule. Maybe 2 days per facility depending on size. For 17 facilities, that's 34 days roughly before installation begins. Holcroft was quiet. Is it worth it? You're asking me if 34 days of prevention is worth more than the alternative. What's the alternative? You discover Environment 6 after deployment, in a live facility, with your operations running on the system. A long pause. 34 days, Holcroft said. 34 days, Caleb confirmed. Holcroft looked at the table. I want your team to run those site surveys, he said. Not a third-party contractor, your team. The people who know what to look for. That's a significant resource commitment on our end. I know what it is. I'm telling you what I want. He looked at Caleb directly. I'm also telling you that if the deployment goes the way this demonstration went, Westbridge has a long-term infrastructure partner in Holcroft Industries. We have 43 facilities in 6 states. This is not the only project. Caleb held that information with both hands and didn't let it show on his face. I'll bring it to Adriana. She already knows. I told her before I called you in here. He paused. I called you in here because I wanted to hear your answer to the question without someone else in the room. Because the answer to that question tells me something about the person giving it. Caleb looked at him. What does my answer tell you? That you'd rather add a month to a project than discover the problem in someone's live facility. Holcroft paused. That's not the engineering answer, that's the right answer. Caleb was quiet for a moment. 11 years, he said. I've been in enough live facilities after something went wrong. I'd rather add the month. Holcroft stood. He extended his hand. Caleb stood and shook it. I'll see you in the debrief, Holcroft said. The debrief lasted 45 minutes. Sandra Chu and Torres asked 8 technical questions. Caleb answered 5 of them. Marcus answered 2. Patterson answered 1, which was about hardware warranty protocols, and he answered it in the particular way Patterson answered things: direct, complete, no excess. At the end of the debrief, Holcroft looked around the table. We'll have a formal decision to Adriana within 10 days, he said. But I want to say in this room that this has been the most rigorous and most honest technical demonstration my team has been through in the 3 years we've been evaluating this category of system. He paused. The isolation protocol documentation, alone, the methodology, the detection framework, that's not something vendors typically provide. That tells us something about how you think about deployment, not just about the product. He looked at Caleb when he said it. Not exclusively, but deliberately. The room didn't miss it. When Holcroft's team filed out, Adriana walked them to the elevator, and the engineering team was left alone in the conference room. The specific silence of people who have just finished something enormous and don't yet know how to return to normal volume. Davis broke it first because Davis always broke silences. Torres said it was the cleanest deployment architecture he'd evaluated in 4 years. Davis, Marcus said. What? It's true, he said it. I know he said it. We all know he said it. Priya heard it. Patterson heard it. I heard it. Then why can't I? Because we don't celebrate until the contract is signed. Caleb said the same thing. Because Caleb is right. Caleb was looking at the empty table. I was thinking about what Holcroft had said. About the isolation protocol documentation. About the methodology. About the detection framework that Patterson had asked him to write into the team knowledge base because it needed to survive beyond one project. He was thinking about the version of himself that had sat at that facility management terminal at 1:30 a.m. with a mop bucket parked outside the door. He was thinking about how that version and this version were the same person. Same mind, same ears, same ability to listen to the way things were broken. The only thing that had changed was the room he was sitting in. Patterson stood up. Good work, he said to the room, and then specifically to Caleb. Your protocol held across every environment they threw at it, including the ones they didn't tell us about in advance. They ran independent tests. Torres had 3 scenarios in his back pocket that weren't on the agenda. I recognized what he was doing. Didn't say anything. Patterson's expression was the closest thing to satisfied that Caleb had seen from him. Your protocol handled all 3. Caleb sat with that. I didn't know. I know you didn't know. That's why it counts. Adriana found Caleb in the lab at 6 p.m. The team had dispersed around 4. Adriana had told everyone to go home in the specific tone that meant she was telling them and not suggesting it. And the building had gradually quieted to its evening register, the shift from the daytime hum to the nighttime one that Caleb knew better than almost anyone. How was doing something he hadn't done deliberately, but had drifted toward, without noticing he was sitting at his workstation, looking at the monitoring display, listening to the system. Adriana stood in the doorway. I figured you'd still be here. He turned. I was just listening, she said. She came in and sat in the chair across from him, the same way she'd sat across from him in her office 3 weeks ago. Robert called me from the car, she said. Caleb waited. He's moving forward. I'm going to let you read the formal letter when it comes, but he wanted me to know tonight. She paused. He also asked me to extend a specific request. He wants you on the site survey team for all 17 facilities. Lead position. You'd be coordinating directly with his infrastructure team. Caleb was quiet. That's a significant travel commitment, Adriana said. I know you have Maya. I want to be transparent. I told Robert that any scheduling needs to account for your situation. He said that was fine. He said... She paused, and something in her voice shifted. He said the conversation you had with him about Environment 6 and the 34 days told him you were someone who thought about consequences before they happened. He said he'd rather adjust the schedule than lose that perspective on the survey team. Caleb looked at his hands. I need to talk to my sister, he said. About the travel. It won't be an automatic yes, even if I want to say yes, because it's not just my life. I understand that. I'm telling you this directly. I know. That's why I'm telling you directly instead of putting it in an email. He looked at her. You keep doing that, he said. Doing what? Treating me like a person whose complete situation is relevant to the decision. Adriana looked at him for a moment. I'm going to tell you something that I don't usually say out loud in professional contexts, she said. When I watched that security footage you at 1:30 in the morning, fixing a problem that my whole engineering team couldn't fix, and then picking up your mop and walking away, what I felt was not impressed. What I felt was angry. He went still. Not at you, at the system. At the months of your walking past all of us, and all of us walking past you, and the specific accumulation of assumptions that created the conditions for that moment. A man with your ability doing that job for that long, and not one person thinking to ask. She paused. That anger is useful information. It tells me something about what kind of organization I'm running. It tells me something about what I want to change. Caleb was quiet. I want you to know that the offer, the role, the survey team position, none of it is charity. None of it is optics. I am running a business, and I need the best people, and you are demonstrably one of them. That's the complete basis of the decision. She paused. But I also want you to know that I saw what that footage showed, and I didn't look away from it. He sat with that for a long moment. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. Do the work. You're already doing it. She stood. Talk to your sister. Tell me by the end of the week. Take the time you need. She left. He sat in the quiet lab. The monitoring board glowed steady and green. All 17 environments. All nominal. The system running exactly the way it was designed to run, after all the hours and all the adjustments and all the careful, unglamorous work of finding what was wrong before it had the chance to fail in a room full of people. He thought about what she'd said, the anger, the useful information. I thought about what it meant to be seen by someone in a position of power, not rescued, not managed, not assigned a narrative, but seen. Actually seen. The distinction was not small. He had been in enough rooms to know the difference, and the difference was everything. He turned off his workstation. He put on his jacket. He rode the main elevator down. He walked through the lobby, past Gloria's empty desk, past the security station, where Gerald gave him a nod, past the marble floors he had mopped 140-odd times in the dark. He walked through the front entrance, the main entrance, the glass doors. He called Denise from the parking lot. She answered immediately, which meant she'd been watching her phone. Well? They're moving forward. A sound from Denise that was not a word but communicated everything. There's a site survey team. They want me to lead. Travel. 17 facilities across 6 states. I need to talk to you about whether we can work the schedule. Yes, Denise said. Den. I haven't told you the schedule yet. I don't care about the schedule. Yes. You can't. Caleb Marcus Anderson, yes. Whatever it is, yes. We figure it out. That's what we do. He leaned against his car. I don't want to put too much on you. You're not putting anything on me. I'm choosing this. There's a difference. A pause. Maya is going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. You're going to go do your job, and you're going to be excellent at it. And we are going to figure out every scheduling complication as it comes, because that's what family does. He looked up at the building. I know that. Then stop trying to be grateful and start being practical. When do you need to give them an answer? End of the week. Then we sit down Thursday. You me the actual calendar. We map it out. Then you give them your answer. Okay, okay. A pause. Caleb? Yeah. She was right, you know. Diane. She always said you were the best systems engineer she'd ever seen. She used to tell people that, at parties, to strangers sometimes. He laughed softly. She was embarrassing. She was proud. Big difference. Another pause. She would have been here today. You know that. I know. She would have been in that lobby at 10 a.m. trying to watch through the window. They would have had to call security. She wouldn't have cared. He could hear Denise smiling. She would have been outside with a sign. Please don't tell Maya about the sign. Too late. I already told her. He dropped his head. Denise. She's making one. For when you get back, don't ruin the surprise. He stood in the parking and laughed fully without managing it. The way he'd laughed in the old life when things were full and ordinary, and he took the fullness for granted. The way you always take the best things for granted until you understand what their absence feels like. I'll be home by 7:30, he said. We'll be here. He drove home. Maya was asleep on the couch when he got in. She'd tried to wait up. She'd made it to approximately 8:15 based on the position of the throw blanket and the TV remote and the empty juice glass on the coffee table. Denise was in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug. She lasted longer than I expected, Denise said quietly. She make the sign. It's on the kitchen table. Don't look at it until tomorrow. She wants to show you. He didn't look. He went to the couch. He sat on the edge of it next to Maya. She was deeply asleep, the total unguarded sleep of a child who trusts completely that the world will be in order when she wakes up. Her backpack was still sideways on the floor where she'd dropped it. Her shoes were by the door, Velcro straps neatly tucked. He looked at her for a long time. I thought about all the nights he'd driven home from Westbridge at 6:30 a.m., and she'd been asleep like this, and he'd covered her and gone to bed, and she'd woken up, and he'd been there, and they'd moved through the days in the particular rhythm of two people doing their best with what they had. He thought about how she'd never once made him feel like what they had wasn't enough. He pulled the blanket up around her shoulders. She stirred, not fully awake. Halfway the way, children surface briefly and then descend again. Daddy. Yeah, go back to sleep. Did it go good? It went really good. A pause. I knew, she said, still mostly asleep. I made you a sign. I heard. Don't look until tomorrow. I won't. Another pause. Daddy. Yeah, baby. Are you happy? He sat with that question in the quiet of the apartment. The real simple enormous weight of it coming from a 7-year-old in the dark. Yeah, he said. I really am. She settled back into sleep. He stayed there a little while longer. Then he stood up. He went to the kitchen. He didn't look at the sign on the kitchen table, but he stood near it. He put his hand on the kitchen table next to it. He stood there in his own kitchen, in his own ordinary apartment, in the ordinary life that had bent and broken and somehow held its shape around the people inside it. He thought about the gray uniform folded in his closet. He'd kept it. He wasn't sure yet what exactly that meant, why he'd folded it and put it away instead of returning it to the supply room. But he knew it wasn't shame, and it wasn't sentimentality exactly. It was something more like evidence. Evidence that the version of him who had pushed that cart for 14 months and listened to systems through glass walls and said nothing and kept moving. That version had not been diminished by the circumstances it moved through. It had been waiting. The same way the answer to a problem is always there before you find it. Present. Quiet. Waiting for someone to look in the right place. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. And for the first time in a very long time, he slept without waking at 2 a.m. He slept the whole way through. The sign said, "My dad fixes things nobody else can." It was written in red marker on a piece of poster board that Maya had clearly worked on for a long time. The letters were careful, outlined twice with stars in the corners that she'd colored in with alternating yellow and gold, because she'd run out of yellow and improvised. She'd drawn a small figure at the bottom that Caleb understood was supposed to be him in a blue shirt standing next to something large and rectangular with green lights on it. He looked at it for the long time at the kitchen table Friday morning, while she stood across from him watching his face with her mother's eyes. "You like it?" "I love it. I made it last night." Aunt Denise helped with the straight lines. "The straight lines are very good. I did the letters myself. The letters are excellent." She studied him studying it. "Are you going to hang it up?" "At my office." Her face did something complicated. The specific expression of a 7-year-old trying to contain satisfaction and not entirely succeeding. "Okay," she said, like she hadn't been hoping for exactly that answer. He rolled it carefully and put a rubber band around it and set it by his bag. She watched him do it. "Daddy." "Yeah. I'm glad it went good yesterday." "Me too, baby. I wasn't worried." "I know you weren't. I was a little worried." He looked at her. She lifted one shoulder in a small shrug that was so precisely Diane that it moved through him like a current. "Just a little," she said. "That's okay," he said. "Me too." The formal contract from Holcroft Industries arrived 9 days later. Caleb was in the lab when Adriana forwarded it to the team with a single line of text. "It's done. Well done, everyone." The room did not erupt. These were engineers. What happened was quieter and more real. People looked at their screens and then at each other, and there was a sustained exhale that moved through the room like a tide going out, the release of something that had been held for a very long time. Davis made a sound that was technically a word, but functionally a noise. Priya put her face in her hands for approximately 4 seconds, and then sat up straight and went back to her screen as if nothing had happened. Patterson walked to the window and stood there with his coffee and said nothing, and didn't need to. Marcus turned to Caleb. He didn't say anything either for a moment. Then, "Dinner. Tonight. The whole team. Non-negotiable. I need to arrange. Bring Maya. Bring your sister. Bring whoever you need to bring." Marcus. "Non-negotiable, Caleb. I said what I said." Priya looked up from her screen. He really did say what he said. Davis was already texting someone, probably everyone he knew. Caleb looked at Marcus. "Okay," he said. "Okay." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm making a reservation. How many people total?" 3 from my side, maybe 4. "I'll book for 12. He paused. "Patterson, you're coming." "I'm busy," Patterson said, still at the window. "You're not busy." "How would you know?" "Because you're never busy on Fridays. You told me that 2 years ago." A pause. "I said I prefer not to make plans on Fridays." "Same thing." Another pause. "Make it for 13, Patterson said. Denise wore a dress and brought her 2 kids, who were 9 and 11, and had opinions about everything, and consumed an enormous amount of bread from the basket before anyone else had been seated. Maya sat between Caleb and Denise and ordered the pasta with the focused deliberation of someone who had considered the menu carefully and arrived at a defensible conclusion. The table was loud in the way of people who had been through something together and were now on the other side of it and didn't need to perform the celebration, because the celebration was just being there at a table in ordinary life, which had somehow become worth something again. Marcus gave a toast. It was not a long toast. Marcus was many things, but he was not a long toast person. 3 weeks ago, I was in this building at midnight, convinced we were going to lose the most important client we'd ever had. I'd run out of ideas. My team had run out of ideas. And the person who wasn't out of ideas was someone none of us had thought to ask. He paused. I want to say publicly in front of everyone at this table, including people I've never met before tonight, I'm sorry for that. And I'm grateful for what came after. He looked at Caleb. The table was quiet. Caleb looked back at him. You can keep going, Caleb said. You're doing fine. Marcus laughed, surprised, genuine, the laugh of a man who needed it. The table laughed with him. Maya looked up at her father. Was that about you? Mostly. Because you fixed the thing. Because I fixed the thing. She nodded slowly, as if this confirmed information she had already filed under settled matters. I knew you would, she said, and went back to her pasta. Denise caught Caleb's eye across the table. She raised her glass slightly. He raised his. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. The site surveys began 6 weeks later. The schedule that Caleb and Denise had mapped out on a Thursday evening with a physical calendar spread across the kitchen table turned out to be workable in the way that things are workable when enough people are willing to be flexible. Denise adjusted her hours 2 days a week. Their mother drove down from Delaware for the longer trips, and Maya, who had been informed of the arrangement with full transparency, because Maya did not accept incomplete information, had said, "So you'll be gone sometimes, but you'll always come back. Always. And you'll call every night. Video call, not just a phone call. Video call." She'd considered this. "Okay, but I want a souvenir from every city." "Maya. Something small. It doesn't have to be expensive." He'd looked at his daughter, this small, serious, entirely unreasonable person who was the best thing he'd ever been part of. 1 souvenir per city. "Deal," she'd said, and extended her hand to shake on it with the gravity of someone finalizing a contract. He'd shaken it. The first facility was in Pittsburgh. Caleb flew in on a Monday morning with a 2-person survey team. A junior engineer named Reyes, who was 26 and extremely eager, and had been chosen by Marcus specifically because Marcus thought Reyes needed field experience, and a facilities specialist named Ortega, who had done pre-installation assessments for 15 years and had the particular calm of someone who had walked into every kind of unexpected situation and come out the other side with documentation. They spent 2 days doing what Caleb had promised Holcroft they would do, walking every inch of the facility, mapping every power management system, active and dormant, looking for the ghosts. They found 2. Not the catastrophic kind. Not the kind that would have caused an immediate failure. The kind that would have surfaced 6 months into deployment as an intermittent anomaly that nobody could reliably reproduce, and that would have gradually eroded confidence in the system until someone decided the system was the problem. Caleb documented both. He wrote up the detection methodology in the same plain, precise language he'd learned to use, not performing expertise, demonstrating it, which was a different thing. Reyes watched him work the way he'd watched everything on this trip, with the focused attention of someone who understood they were learning something they wouldn't find in a manual. On the last night in Pittsburgh, they ate at a diner near the hotel, and Reyes asked him directly, "Can I ask you something personal?" "Depends on the question." "When you were on the cleaning staff, did you know the whole time that you could do this?" He gestured vaguely at the folder of survey documentation between them. "Did you know you still had it?" Caleb thought about this honestly. "I knew I hadn't forgotten how. The knowledge doesn't go anywhere. But knowing you can do something and believing it counts the same way." He paused. "Those are different things." "What changed it?" Caleb thought about a 7-year-old on the phone asking him if he'd fixed the thing yet. About a 1:30 a.m. decision made in an empty corridor. About a woman who watched security footage twice and then asked a question instead of making an assumption. "Someone asked," he said simply. "Someone looked at what I did and asked what I knew." Reyes was quiet. "That's it. That's most of it. That seems like a small thing." "It is a small thing," Caleb said. "That's the part that should bother you." Reyes sat with that. He picked up his coffee. "I'm going to remember that," he said. "Good." He bought Maya a small steel bridge keychain from the Pittsburgh Airport gift shop. It cost $4.50. He put it in his jacket pocket and carried it home like it was something that mattered, because it was. The surveys took 11 weeks. 11 weeks of Monday morning flights and Thursday evening returns of video calls at 9 p.m. with Maya showing him whatever she'd drawn or built, or decided that day of Denise texting him updates that ranged from practical to absurd of hotel rooms in 6 states, that all had the same carpet pattern and different views of facilities, that all had their own personalities. The ones run by people who cared, where everything was documented and maintained, and the walkthrough was smooth, and the ones run by people who had been doing the minimum for long enough that the ghosts had accumulated. He found 11 anomalies across the 17 facilities. 3 were significant enough that installation would have been delayed by them if discovered during deployment. 8 were the smaller kind, the ones that become problems over time rather than immediately. All 11 were documented. All 11 were resolved before installation began. He wrote the final survey report himself, not because it was his job. Specifically, it could have been Reyes, it could have been Ortega, but because the methodology that ran through all of it was his, and he felt the obligation to explain it completely, to put into words not just what he'd found, but how he'd been looking, so that the next person who did this work, and there would be a next person, because this was now how Westbridge approached pre-installation, would know what to look for before they knew what was wrong. Patterson read the full report. He sent Caleb a single-line email. It said, "This is the best pre-installation documentation I've read in 20 years. Put your name on the cover page." Caleb put his name on the cover page. The Nova Grid deployment at the first Holcroft facility went live on a Tuesday morning. Caleb was on site. He stood in the monitoring room with Sandra Chu's infrastructure team and watched the system come up clean, all parameters, nominal, all connections, stable, the isolation protocol, handling the facility's power management interactions exactly the way it was designed to handle them. Sandra Chu was there. She watched the board go green. She stood next to Caleb. 11 anomalies, she said, across 17 facilities. 11. 3 of them significant. Yes. If we'd skipped the surveys, you wouldn't have known until you did. She was quiet for a moment. When Robert told me about the 34 days you recommended the pre-installation surveys, the time commitment. I'll be honest, my first instinct was that it was the vendor overselling the complexity to justify a longer engagement. He looked at her. "I know," she said. "I'm telling you because you should know what you were up against and what you overcame." She paused. The 11 anomalies changed my instinct. Evidence usually does. Something close to a smile. "Robert was right about you," she said. "What did he say?" "That you think about consequences before they happen." She turned back to the board. "That's rarer than it should be." They watched the system run, clean and steady and exactly right. 6 months after the Holcroft contract was signed, Adriana called Caleb into her office. Not the urgent call of a problem. The scheduled kind it was on his calendar, 30 minutes. No agenda listed, which he'd learned meant she had something specific to say, and wanted the space to say it without the shape of an agenda constraining the conversation. He sat across from her at the same work table where 14 months ago she'd looked at him and asked why he was cleaning their building instead of designing their systems. "The board approved the new division structure last week," Adriana said. "I want to talk to you about what that means." "Okay. We're formalizing the pre-installation assessment practice into its own service offering. It's a billable product now. Clients pay for it separately from the system installation. The Holcroft work demonstrated the value in a way that translates directly into revenue, and 3 other clients have already asked for it." Caleb was listening. "I want to build a team around it. Dedicated. 3 to 5 engineers, possibly more as we scale, with a methodology built on the framework you developed." She paused. "I want you to lead it." The room was quiet. "Not as a specialist," she continued. "As a department head. You'd be building the team, developing the training, refining the methodology, and overseeing client engagements. It's a different role than what you're in now. More management, more leadership, there's a distinction." She held his gaze. "You'd still be in the field on significant engagements. I know you're not going to be happy entirely behind a desk, and I'm not asking you to be. But you'd be building something. Not just building it so that it continues and scales and outlasts any single project." Caleb looked at the table. He thought about the report he'd written, the methodology, Patterson's email. "Put your name on the cover page." I thought about what it meant for something to outlast you, to build a way of looking at a problem so clearly that other people could use it after you were out of the room. "The team I'd be building," he said. "How much input do I have on who? Full input. Final say on hiring within the budget I give you." "I want Reyes." "I assumed." and I want the hiring process to look different than how most hiring looks." Adriana didn't blink. "Tell me what that means." "It means I want to interview people whose resumes have gaps, people who've been out of the field for a while, people who took whatever work was available when the right work wasn't." He paused. "It means I want to look past the paper and ask what they know, the same way you looked past my white keycard." Adriana was quiet for a long moment. "You'd be building the team the way someone should have built you a role 2 years ago." "Yes. Some of those people are going to be raw. They're going to need more investment." "I know. That's part of it." She leaned back. "Okay. Okay. I said okay. You have full discretion on the process. I want results. I want a team that's excellent and a methodology that scales. How you build toward that is yours to determine." She paused. "But Caleb, if you do this, if you build this team the way you're describing, you're making a promise to those people. The same way I made a promise to you when I gave you the chance. You understand that?" He looked at her. "I understand that." "Good," she said. "Then let's talk about what this actually looks like." He told Maya that night. Not all of it. Not the organizational structure, or the budget parameters, or the formal title that was still being finalized. Just the thing underneath all of that. "I'm going to build a team," he said. "People who know how to find problems that other people can't find. And I'm going to find people who are good at it, who haven't had a chance to show it yet." Maya was at the kitchen table doing homework. She looked up. "Like you," she said. "Like me." She looked at him for a moment. "So you're going to find them before someone has to find you." He sat with that. His 7-year-old daughter had just said more precisely than he had exactly what he meant. "Yeah," he said. "Something like that." She nodded satisfied and went back to her homework. He stood in the kitchen. "I thought about how the thing that happened to you, the loss, the gap, the years of being walked past either becomes a wound you carry or a tool you use. And sometimes if you're fortunate enough and stubborn enough and have people around you who believe the right things at the right times, it becomes both. A wound that healed into something useful. Evidence that what you survived was real and that surviving it meant something." He thought about Diane, not with the sharp grief of early loss that had not gone away, would never go entirely away, but had become something he lived alongside rather than underneath. He thought about her the way you think about someone who shaped you so fundamentally that the thinking itself is just seeing yourself clearly. Her stubbornness in Maya's jaw. Her pride in the way he'd said, "I know what I know." Her presence in every room he walked into as the person he'd promised to be for their daughter. "I thought I hope you can see this." He thought I think you probably can. The gray uniform was still in the closet. He'd thought about what to do with it many times over the months since everything changed. There was a version of the story where you got rid of it, where the act of moving on meant removing the evidence of where you'd been. Some people needed that. The clean break, the closed door. That wasn't his version. He kept it folded on the shelf above the winter coats, in the same place he'd put it the morning after the night everything shifted. He didn't display it. It wasn't a shrine. It was just there. Present. Part of the inventory of a life that had bent and not broken. One afternoon, about 8 months after the Holcroft contract, he was getting Maya's good coat down from the top shelf. The new one, the one with the real lining, the one that zipped all the way up, and the gray uniform shifted and fell off the shelf. He picked it up. He held it for a moment. Maya appeared in the doorway of the closet. "Is that your old work uniform?" "Yeah." She looked at it. "Why do you keep it?" I thought about how to answer that in a way that was true, and also something a 7-year-old could hold. "Because it reminds me of something important." "What?" "That the job you're doing isn't always the same thing as who you are." He looked at the uniform. "And that sometimes the best thing you can do is show up and do the work in front of you even when it's not the work you thought your life would be." Maya considered this. "And then someone notices." "Sometimes, if you're lucky. And if they don't." He looked at his daughter. "Then you still did the work. You still showed up. You still knew what you knew." He folded the uniform carefully. Nobody can take that, even when they can't see it. She looked at the uniform in his hands, then she looked at him. I would have noticed, she said. I know you would have. I always noticed. Yeah, baby, you always did. He put the uniform back on the shelf. He took down her coat. She put it on, zipped it all the way up. Ready, he said. Ready, she said. They walked out together. The poster was on the wall of his office, not framed. Maya had been offended by the suggestion of a frame which she considered unnecessarily formal for a piece of poster board, so it was tacked up flat against the wall beside his desk, with 4 pushpins, 1 in each corner, slightly uneven, because Maya had done it herself. My dad fixes things. Nobody else can. Red letters. Stars in the corners. The small blue-shirted figure at the bottom next to the large rectangle with green lights. People who came into his office noticed it. Some smiled. Some asked about it. He told them his daughter made it. A few of them, the ones who asked follow-up questions, got the fuller version of the story. And a few of those, the ones who listened all the way through, looked at the poster and then at him with the particular look of someone assembling pieces they hadn't known were part of the same picture. One of those people was a woman named Carla, who Caleb had hired onto the assessment team 3 months into building it. She was 41 with a 12-year gap on her resume that she'd explained in her interview with the same directness he'd used with Sandra Chu. She'd left the field to care for a sick parent, and by the time the caregiving was over, the gap was long enough that the doors had stopped opening. Caleb had asked her 3 technical questions during the interview. She'd answered all 3 correctly, and the third one better than he would have. He'd hired her the next day. She'd been in his office for a check-in about a client engagement when she noticed the poster. She stopped mid-sentence. Your daughter made that? Yes. How old is she? 7, almost 8. Carla looked at the poster for a moment. She's right, you know, she said quietly. It wasn't flattery. It was the statement of a person who had been found after being unfound and knew exactly what that felt like from the inside. So are you, he said. And we've got a site survey in Cleveland on Monday that's going to prove it. She looked at him. I'm ready. I know you are. That's why you're here. She went back to the check-in. He went back to work. There are people who pass through the world in ways that the world records names on buildings, titles in directories, photographs in company histories. The record of their presence is legible, easy to find. And there are people who carry their whole resume in their hands every day, unseen, walking through rooms that don't know their name, doing work that disappears behind them like footprints in a mopped hallway. Caleb Anderson had been both. He knew which one felt more like himself. He also knew that the distance between them was often not ability, not character, not worth. It was a door. Question someone asked or didn't ask. A piece of footage someone chose to watch or didn't watch. A person willing to look past a white keycard and ask what was behind it. He had been found, and he had decided that finding was not something that should happen only once to one person when the circumstances aligned just right. He had decided it was something that could be built, systematized, written into a hiring process, a team philosophy, a way of looking at resumes that started with the question not of what was missing, but of what was there. He was building it. One person at a time. One question at a time. The same way he'd always fixed things, not by assuming he knew where the problem was, but by listening carefully, looking at the relationships between things, and refusing to stop until he found what everyone else had walked past. Some problems hide in the space between systems. Some people do too. And the greatest skill, the one that took 11 years to develop and 14 months of silence to sharpen, and one 1:30 a.m. decision to